Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April meeting of the Wilmot Township Committee of Adjustment. I'd like to introduce the members of our committee. Tonight we have with us Miss Louise Lalonde, Mr. Tyler Bowman, Mr. Steve Miller, and Mr. Peter Rowe, and my name is Wayne Roth. We also have Mr. Andrew Martin, who is a senior township planner and the secretary treasurer of our committee, as well as Mr. Cameron Miller, who is a township planner and will be introducing all the applications. Also want to thank Carl Jeffries, excuse me, who's dealing with the technicalities tonight. Sorry about that, Carl. Excuse me. Now, I'm not aware that there's anyone of an Indigenous background that wishes to read the land acknowledgement for the Township of Wilmot, so I will do so. We have gathered in the Township of Wilmot in the traditional territory of the Neutral, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the dish with one spoon covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and to Mother Earth. We should only take what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant in the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community. We are an independent body appointed by Wilmot Township Council, and we have the power to make minor changes to existing zoning regulations and to approve some changes to existing non-conforming uses, as well as to give consent. Each applicant will be notified in writing of the decision of this committee within 10 days, and with that decision will be instructions on how it can be appealed. Any decision made by this committee can be appealed to the Land Tribunal, who will then hold a meeting and make a final decision. As well as any decision on the variance follows the same process. For the format of the meeting, I will ask Mr. Miller to introduce each applicant. The applicant will then be invited to come forward and to add any additional information if they choose to do so. Following this, anyone else in the general public will have the opportunity to speak for or against the application. Committee members will then be able to question the applicant, and the committee will then make a final decision. Are apparently using the raised hand system this evening, so for applicants who wish to address committee, that is the process to follow. Members of committees, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? Seeing none, Mr. Miller, would you please then introduce the first application?
Thank you, Mr. Roth. The first application this evening is a variance application A06/21. It concerns 222 Wilmot Street in New Hamburg. This application is proposing to reduce the rear yard setback of a proposed 4-unit residential building from 7.5 meters to approximately 4 meters. So as discussed in the report, development of the subject lands were originally contemplated through a previous zone change application that was approved by council in February 2020, and it also reduced the front yard setback to 3.5 meters at that time. And then subsequently there was a severance application that resulted in the actual creation of the lot, and the applicant has since proposed expanding the original extent of the rear of the building to maximize development of the subject property, which then results in the need for a variance. So this application is only contemplating if the expansion of the rear of the building is appropriate. And so that's the actual extent of the building is highlighted on the sketch in hatching. And then the difference in the rear yard setbacks, what's currently permitted and what would be permitted should the variance be approved is in blue and red indicated on the sketch. In circulating the application, We did receive some concerns surrounding the potential impact on the surrounding environment, and also some concerns with respect to the front yard setback of 3.5 meters. Staff would highlight that the reduction of the front yard setback was already previously contemplated and approved by council in a previous application, and that all 3 applications put forward on this property, the zone change, the severance, and now the variance application, GRC has been included and they've had no concerns. Having said that, a GRCA permit would still be required because the property is regulated prior to any building permit being issued. If the application were to not be approved, the owner is still permitted to, under existing zoning regulations, construct a 4-unit residential building in an identical footprint, with the exception of the rear yard setback being reduced. So for that reason, staff are recommending that the application be approved, given that there is no concerns from GRCA and that the setback requirements for their office can be maintained.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Does the applicant wish to address committee?
Yes, I'm going to add Shelley Roth to the meeting right now. So Shelley, you are joined. You just have to unmute if you'd like to say anything.
What if I don't want to say anything?
They can hear you now.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. I have nothing to add.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the virtual audience that wishes to comment on this application? Mr. Martin?
I don't see any hands raised. Maybe just ask one more time just to confirm.
Are we clear, Mr. Martin?
Yeah, I don't see any hands raised. No.
Okay,
So
thank you very much. I will then turn it over to members of committee. Are there any comments, questions, or concerns? Seeing none, I would then ask for a motion for approval of submission A06/21. Moved by Ms. Lalonde, seconded by Mr. Rowe. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you very much. Mr. Miller, would you introduce the next application?
Thank you, Mr. Roth. The next application is also a variance application, application number A07/21. It's concerning 339 Peel Street in New Hamburg. This application is proposing to reduce the lot width requirement of a single detached dwelling from approximately 15 meters to 12.2 meters. So the property is currently zoned Zone 3 residential. It's developed with a single detached dwelling. It is proposed to be demolished, and the proposed reduction in lot width would then facilitate a severance of the property, which is also subject, is before the committee tonight as well, into 2 residential lots. So there is a distinction between lot width and lot frontage. So lot width, again, is the lot at the width of the street. Lot frontage is the lot width at the width of the street. And then the lot width is the width of the lot at the required front yard setback, which in this instance is 7.6 meters. So they only need a requirement for the lot width requirement, and all the other requirements for the zone are met. So for that reason, staff are recommending that the application be approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Does the applicant or his or her representative wish to address committee on this matter? Mr. Martin, do we have anyone with their?
I don't see any hands raised, but perhaps if anyone did want to speak, they could raise their hand now by clicking on the.
We'll wait for a moment.
All right, I do have Melissa here that'd like to speak. So. All right, I see this. Yep.
Okay. We do have some concerns in that we haven't seen a plan.
Excuse me for one moment, Melissa.
Sure.
Could normally I always in a regular meeting we always ask for your name and address. for the record. So would you please share that? Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yep. Melissa Rabbits. We live next door to the house to the right of it at 343 Peel Street. We are concerned how close to the property line it will end up being, which I've already seen what is allowed. We would have been interested in seeing a plan for what he wants to build and where he proposes to put the parking.
Mr. Miller, do we have that information now?
Yeah, so at this time, a development proposal has not been provided. So again, the existing zoning would allow for a single detached dwelling. Should the applicant choose to build a two-story dwelling, the side yard setback would be 2 meters. For a one-story dwelling, it would be 1.5 meters. And for the rear yard setback, it's 7.5, and for the front, it's 7.6. So again, should none of those regulations be met, we would be returning to the Committee of Adjustment for a variance application to reduce those requirements. So we can obviously appreciate that, you know,
Okay,
it's hard.
Sorry, can you confirm how many parking spaces he has to supply? Because there is no parking on Peel in the winter.
Sure.
And I understand he's allowed an apartment with the residential.
Okay.
So my concern is that apartment intending to be a separate building at the back of the lot, which impinges on my backyard enjoyment? Or is it going to be within the dwelling?
Sure. So that was a two-part question. So first I'll address parking. So the first being the zoning bylaw requires 2 spaces per dwelling unit. So the main single detached dwelling, there'd be a minimum of 2 parking spaces required to be provided. And then for any additional dwelling unit, there's an additional parking space of 1. So the current zoning allows for both an additional dwelling unit attached, which essentially is a basement apartment, and then an additional dwelling unit detached. Now, it's not something that's currently proposed. Again, there hasn't been a proposal. That's not to suggest that the applicant couldn't choose to do so. There's no ability for us to prevent the applicant from constructing that. It's what the zone already allows for. And provincial policy mandates that we have second unit policies in our official plan and in our zoning bylaw.
And I do understand that. Is there any way to defer this until he provides the proposal, the building plan?
That would ultimately be a decision by the Committee of Adjustment if they decided to defer the application. You know, staff are of the opinion that this simply is a reduction in lot width, and should the actual development proposal be put forward at a time where the regulations weren't met, then we would be returning the Committee of Adjustment. If parking was a concern, if anything outside of the current regulations in Zone 3 couldn't be met, then we would return, and the public process would need to occur again, where notice would be given, and the committee can look at an evaluation at that time. But right now, the applicant is simply proposing to reduce the lot width, which would then facilitate that severance. But the lot width requirement is being reduced to allow for a single detached dwelling on each lot. And the existing zoning allows for an additional dwelling unit detached and detached, which again isn't subject to this application, but that's not to suggest that it isn't already outright permitted in the zoning.
Okay, does this reduction in width allow for 2 cars parked side by side and still green space out front? Is the yard wide enough for all that?
It looks like Mr. Martin would like to add something, so I will defer to him for a second.
I was just going to say, I see that the applicant's consultant is in attendance and has raised his hand. So perhaps we can, Mr. Miller or myself, we can answer that question, but then it may be appropriate to ask Mr. Patterson to attend the meeting, because he may be able to answer some of those questions more directly. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
So perhaps I'll do that right now at this point and go from there.
Mr. Patterson, welcome. Oh. I don't see him, Andrew, so.
Good evening, committee members. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Mr. Patterson. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. Just as a brief summary, naturally I'm here in support of the application tonight, and I agree with everything that staff have said so far. The direction at this time is to construct a single detached dwelling on the lot. I do not have instructions from the proponent to look for an accessory dwelling or an accessory unit on the property. And as noted by staff, the application before you tonight essentially meets all the zoning regulations that are proposed for a single detached dwelling, save and except lot width, which is what we're seeking the variance for. If anything changes, as Mr. Miller had stated, if we need any additional variances, then we'll be back before this committee for seeking a variance if there was something else we couldn't abide by.
I have no problem with it as that's proposed then. I would rather see two nice houses than what's there's currently.
I'm having difficulty hearing that question. Who are you directing it to, Melissa?
Sorry, I'm just saying we have no problem with the lot being severed. We'd rather see two nice houses as long as it's in keeping with the neighborhood.
I can't comment on that.
No, I'm just putting that out there.
Okay. And any other comments or questions from anyone in the audience? Mr. Martin?
No, there's no one else wishing to speak to this application.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it over to members of committee. Any comments, questions, or concerns? Seeing none, could I then have a motion to approve the application?
If I could just interrupt for a,
I'm sorry, Mr. Martin.
I just given there's both a variance and a consent application tied to this, the attendees are here. It may make sense to deal with the recommendation on both.
Do both of them at the same time?
But I would take them as separate motions.
Okay, well, we can certainly do that. We're dealing right now with A07 and the consent application is B05. Are there any comments or questions or concerns with either one of them by members of committee or members of the community? I don't see any. So let's then deal with A07. Could I have a motion to that effect? Moved by Mr. Bowman, seconded by Ms. Lalonde. Any discussion on the motion? That is carried. Now B05, any comments, questions, or concerns with that one?
Sorry, could you just explain what that is to me?
Mr. Martin or Mr. Miller, which?
Yeah, so the variance application essentially reduces the lot width requirement, which was just put forth before the Committee of Adjustment, which then facilitates the ability for the severance application to go through, which is essentially resulting in the actual creation of the two lots. So the actual severance of the property, whereas the variance application is addressing that lot width requirement so that the two created lots fully comply with the regulations in the zoning.
Okay, I get it now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members of committee, any comments, questions, or concerns? No. Could I then have a motion on B/05? Moved by Mr. Rowe, seconded by Ms. Lalonde. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you very much, everyone, for contributing. Mr. Miller, would you introduce the next application?
Thank you, Mr. Oath. The next application is a consent application B04/21 concerning 39-1323 Queen Street in New Dundee. So this application is proposing to convey approximately 522 square meters from 39-1323 Queen Street as a lot addition to 1275 Queen Street, which is also referred to as the New Dundee Union Cemetery. So the extent of the actual lot addition is essentially representing lands that have already been historically maintained by the cemetery. And the lot addition would facilitate the ability for the cemetery to add a 4-foot high chain link fence to be erected at the top of the bank. Essentially, there's a steep slope and some difficult topography in that area. So it's essentially recognizing the active use as a cemetery versus the passive use as a steep slope. There were no concerns raised through circulating the application, and staff are recommending that the application be approved.
Thank you very much. Mr. Martin, obviously I'm assuming there's no one wishing to comment.
Well, they're both the owner of the property and the consultant are both in attendance, but if either of them would like to speak, if they want to raise their hand now, I can join them to the meeting. But other than that, there is no one else in attendance.
Yeah,
So
thank you. We'll wait for a moment.
So if either Mr. Brubaker or Mr. Drinkwalter, if you'd like to speak, if you want to just raise your hand, otherwise we'll carry on. And I don't see either of them raising their hand.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Martin. To members of committee, any comments, questions, or concerns regarding this application? Seeing none, would someone then bring forth a motion to approve? Moved by Mr. Miller, seconded by Mr. Bowman. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you all for attending or participating in the meeting this evening. Now we need to approve the minutes of our last meeting. And can I have a motion to that effect? Moved by Ms. Lalonde, seconded by Ms. Lalonde. You can't move and second it. So, Mr. Miller, okay, thank you. That would be very efficient though, Ms. Lalonde, if you could do both, right? Yeah. Anyway, thank you. All in favor of that motion? That motion is carried. Very good. Mr. Martin, do we have any indication as to the May meeting?
I'll let Mr. Miller respond to that.
Oh,
I'm not aware of
Mr.
anything at this point.
We do have one application that's been filed, and we are anticipating another one being filed within the next day. So the tentative meeting date would be May the 5th, which is again a Wednesday. Is there any difficulty with that date for anybody?
Does that look good for all?
That looks good for me.
Well, it looks okay. So if we proceed forward, we'll call it for May the 5th.
Sounds good.
Okay.
We're in a permanent lockdown, so I don't see a problem attending any Zoom meetings.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, thank you all for attending.
Thank
Be
you.
well, stay safe, and good health to all.
And I wish you
Good
all
night.
the same. Good night.